Well, good evening again. Well, good evening again. We're fortunate to have Joel Such join us this evening and share his insights on how developing birding skills will improve your bird photography. But the thing that really intrigued me about Joel was his history. Hopefully you had a chance to look at his bio a bit, but for such a young man, he's done quite a bit. It's impressive. And to talk to the folks at Hunts, which I often do, as you well know, they had very high recommendations for Joel. He's not only, he's a guide right now down in Colombia. He's, been involved with, presentations since you were about 10, I believe. And he's not only a photographer and naturalist, but he's very active in conservation. And that's something I think we'll be talking about with Joel next year in 2022. But his couple of his programs really caught my interest. And one of the things we've been talking about with Hunts is trying to bring young folks into not only nature, but nature and photography and ecology. And again, I've got to thank Hunts for their support and making people like Joel available and some of the programs and workshops. So with that said, I'm not going to go through line by line, but I thought that it's really going to be interesting to see what you have to provide to us. And don't be afraid to bounce ideas off of us or anything else. Place your questions in chat, and from there we will go forward. Joel?
Oh, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I will say a little bit more maybe about myself. I'm not currently guiding. I think they pulled that bio off of my website, which is not updated, but no, I've been spending the majority of the last 3 years down in Colombia. I'm a student at Prescott College, so I'm on my last semester of my undergrad, studying environmental studies, and I'm also in an accelerated master's program. So at the moment, I am very busy juggling those two responsibilities. And yeah, at the moment, I'm back here in Colorado. This is where I grew up, in the foothills of the Front Range. So let's see, do you want me to share my screen right now?
Yes, please do.
Okay, let's see, let's make sure my presentation's ready. Yeah, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And yeah, let's see how this goes. It's a pleasure to be here. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and I'm in this mode. Okay, I think we are ready to roll.
Then forge ahead, Joel.
Okay, so again, my name is Joel Such, and this presentation I will be talking about developing birding and field skills. And kind of, yeah, the theme of the talk is taking birding skills and merging them with photography, like all the technical parts and the lighting composition. I'm actually not going to talk about the technical parts in this, so I'm going to be focusing on field skills and kind of, combining both of the best of both worlds of birding and bird photography. And I'm trying to go forward. It's not letting me. So I'm on Google Slides. Do you know how to go to the next slide?
I am not sure. Jay, are you familiar?
Yeah. Just 1 second here.
Oh, I got it. I see it's in the bottom left. Okay. So yeah, so before going into the presentation, I would like to just quickly go over my equipment that I use, because I'm sure a lot of you will be curious about that. So I really only have one camera set up for birds. That's the Canon 7D Mark II, the Canon 100 to 400. And I recently got a cotton carrier chest harness. So that's how I carry it around. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm mostly living down in Colombia, actually one of the wettest places in the world. It's in the Western Andes, Pacific slope. So much rain that you always need a rain cover, something to keep your equipment dry. So as you can see on that photo, it's actually just a backpack cover that I use. And 8x32 binoculars, I always bring my binoculars with me. Because in this talk, I'm talking about merging the two, and also a Peak Design tripod, but I haven't been using that one too much because I like to stay as mobile as possible, but I've started to do a little bit of filming, so that's why I have that one. And also I want to go over ethics. Ethics are really important to me. So this is my code of ethics. So no baiting beyond bird feeders. No playback. I used to use it a little bit, but I've really decided to just not use it because it's least amount of impact as possible for the birds. And yeah, again, no harassment and no location sharing for sensitive species. Because yeah, for species that, for example, an owl stakeout, if you publish it, then a bunch of birders can come, photographers, and that can be problematic. So yeah, just trying to have the least amount of impact while I go about my my business with photography. And okay, here we go. So part one, I'm going to talk about skill sets and mentalities. And so first I'm going to be, birder versus bird photographer. And yeah, combining the best of both worlds, because the mentalities of both a birder and a bird photographer, in general, they're kind of different, and you can kind of look at each mentality and use the strengths of both. And improving your birding skills, we'll touch upon that. I mean, you could have a whole presentation on that, so I won't go into too much detail. And then opportunistic versus proactive photography, and we'll get to that in a bit. So I started out as a birder, actually at an age of basically as long as I could remember. So here I'm at High Island in Texas. That was my first birding trip outside of Colorado. So it was just amazing. And over the years, I picked up a camera at probably age 10. And then I just slowly started to get more serious with photography because I've been obsessed with birds for my whole life. So it's natural to want to document them. And so that's me on the right currently, last year. And so qualities of a birder. Birders are really good at detecting movement and sound. And that is crucial if you want to photograph birds. Is going to be crucial to really be in tune with your surroundings, and because there's a lot of birds that you're just going to miss. And then good at identifying birds by sight and sound. And if you want to, if you want to find birds, especially some of the more elusive and not so obvious birds, it's going to be that's very important. And birders tend to be really good at finding a diverse selection of birds, including rare and often overlooked species. And so I could go into the pros and cons of being a birder and a bird photographer, but I want to focus more on the positive aspects and then see how we can merge the two. And so for bird photographers, they're really good at understanding light, composition, camera settings. And because if you're going out, if you're a birder and you photographing birds, sometimes you just want to document them. You aren't really interested in getting photos that are actually pleasing to look at. So then, yeah, also for bird photographers, they have the tendency of targeting specific species. So instead of going out and with the goal of seeing how many species can I find, it's more like finding your target species that you really want to photograph. And that's why, yeah, the next point is tendency to spend a lot of time with the selected target species. So bird photographers, they generally are going to be a lot more happy in one day getting one really good photo than 10 mediocre photos. So yeah, kind of the contrasting the two. This is a generalization, but a birder, they're going to go out, they're going to see how many species they can find, and then be happy with, yeah, getting 10 or 20 photos. And it doesn't really matter if they're not the best quality, but bird photographers, they're going to really want to spend the time, get focused on a specific species. Oh, I should have been going through the slides. So yeah, this is good at selecting movement. So yeah, this is a golden fronted redstart. As you can see, it's behind the leaves. So you're gonna have to really get in tune with movement. And then this species, orange-breasted fruit eater, again, it has a very, if you don't know the song, you're never gonna find it. These are species in the Colombian Andes, so very dense environment and dense habitat. And yeah, so it's crucial to know sound. And then, yeah, here's a water thrush, which could be overlooked by a bird photographer that's going for more iconic, large and flashy species. Then this is example of, yeah, going beyond, yeah, looking at light composition and getting a more artistic photo. Yep, again, like I was saying, target specific species, like this sharp-tailed grouse, which, yeah, you could spend a bunch of time with it, like this American dipper. This is probably one of the species that I've spent the most amount of time with. This is, these are pretty common in the rivers here in Colorado. So even though they're pretty common, I love to spend time with them. And again, yeah, here is the two. So see how to merge the two, combining the best of both worlds. And briefly, I want to talk about improving your birding skills, because I talked about kind of the strengths of the birding mindset. So here is just a little bit about that. So just go birding. That's really the best advice I can give. So yeah, enjoy, go outside, and sometimes don't stress about photography and just go with your binoculars. And that's the way you're going to really learn about birding, from identification to behavior, habitats, and all that. So detecting movement, that does come from a lot of experience, I believe. You just have to be out there in the field, because if you don't have a lot of experience, a little flit in the bush, a little fleeting glance of motion, it's just gonna go over your head. So yeah, a lot of time in the field. And for learning bird calls, there's a lot of resources out there. For me, just for the convenience of it, I use Merlin from the Cornell Lab. You get all the different songs. So here, an example of the Rufous antpitta. There's quite a few subspecies of that species, and actually they were separated recently. So the Rufous antpitta is in, I think, 3 species, but here you have all the different species then for the different regions. And then XenoKanto is a really good website where you can get a ton of recordings that you can listen to. And so you type in the species, and then you can just go through and find all these, every single vocalization there is basically, which sometimes you can overlook in an application like Merlin. Going birding with experts, you're always gonna improve if you're around people that are better than yourself. So this is back to this picture. I think I was eight or nine here. And these are two of my mentors. And that was crucial in my development as a birder. So that is Raymond Davis on the left and John Vanderpool, which I'm sure some of you know or have heard of. So yeah, go birding with experts. That's really crucial if you want to improve. And then using Ebird, we're going to go into Ebird more later on. But yeah, to get familiar with Ebird and start submitting lists. So you really are motivated to keep track of all the birds, and that way you're gonna learn more. And get involved with scientific bird monitoring. So I have been involved with bird monitoring since 10. So yeah, I'm here in Colorado, doing various point counts, bird banding, and I had the opportunity to go to Ohio with Black Swamp Bird Observatory. And then more recently, I've been doing research of my own in Colombia. And I think that getting involved with scientific bird monitoring, going through the process of really it forces you to learn everything about the birds that you're monitoring. You're going to be a lot more motivated to identify that little chip note that you'd probably otherwise just walk on by. And so since I started doing monitoring in Colombia, so a little more about this location I'm staying. It is the Montezuma Rainforest. There are nearly 600 species of birds there. Just incredible, so much to learn. And it wasn't until I started to do bird surveys where I started to really learn the bird calls, because I was forced to pay attention to everything that was going around, every little tanager up in the canopy, every little chip note, every vocalization. And so even though bird monitoring doesn't necessarily mix with bird photography, I've struggled a lot with that down in Colombia, because I've been so focused on this research. It's for my thesis for school. So it's been hard to balance that with photography, but in the end, I think it's going to be very beneficial because in the end, I'm going to know a lot about the birds that I want to photograph, and it'll be a lot more easy to photograph them. And opportunistic versus proactive photography. Opportunistic, actually, when for the majority of my life photographing from age 10 to probably 5 years ago, I was, if I want to go photographing, I would go out to a nice location and I would just see what was there. So there's no real planning involved. It's more like, okay, let me go birding. I have my camera, and if a photo opportunity presents itself, great. But then I started to realize that in order to get the really amazing photographs, especially of some of the more rare and elusive species, it was necessary to change my mindset. So not just going out there. So for example, here on the left, this is a broad-billed motmot in Costa Rica. That was photographed by just walking out into the forest, birding, looking for whatever came across my path. And sometimes it works. Some of my best photos were taken opportunistically. Like this broad-billed mott that just was right there on the side of the trail. It's like, wow, perfect. Got this amazing close-up headshot. But at the same time, I'm actually in this presentation going to advocate for a proactive approach. So on the right, this is a torrent duck. which is a duck species endemic to the Andes and these mountain streams. It's such an incredible species. And I really wanted to photograph this one. So it actually took me 3 days scouting, doing all my research, and then narrowing in on a location. And then, so there's a lot of planning involved. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next part is how do you, well, first select the target species, figure out what you want to, this is just like a more focused approach, which can yield better results. For example, you can spend all the time spend the time to think, how can I better capture the essence of the species? So here in this torrent duck, I have some, you can see in the background, some of the turbulent water. So part 2, that leads us into part 2. So determining your target species.
Joel, can I ask a couple of questions here?
Oh yeah. You got it.
We were asked to repeat the documentation you put on, like XenoKanto. What are the other things you use in your targeting of birds?
What other for sound? I don't think I
Well,
caught.
sounds and calls, what they were asking specifically about.
Okay, so I use Merlin, which was up there. That's if for those of you who don't know what that is, it's an application that you can download for free. So that's just a really handy way of listening to all the calls. And I don't use it for playback. I just use it to learn the vocalization. So when I go out into the field, I am prepared. And then XenoKanto is just another way of finding additional recordings of different vocalizations that aren't as common. Does that answer the question?
I believe it does. The other question was if you have any places in Colombia, a lodge or something you might recommend. And maybe we can do that at the end, but I thought I'd at least bring it up.
Yeah, I can probably go into that at the end because I'll be showing a lot of photos actually from Colombia. And I definitely have recommendations, definitely. And I'll be very happy to share those.
Thank you. Okay, part 2.
Okay, part 2. Let's so I'm going to be going through a process that might help you narrow in on the target that you select. So first is going to be determining what your target species is. And then there's going to be a process of doing your research, scouting, and everything in between to finally getting your dream photo. So determining your target, there's many different ways you can do that. Oftentimes you'll just know what you want to photograph. Because like, oh, there's this species, I just like this red-billed tropic bird since I was a little kid. I was like, it's my dream to photograph this species. And so it can be a very photogenic species like this red-billed tropic bird. It could be a bizarre species like this club-winged mannequin, which is endemic to the Western Andes of Colombia and Ecuador. And this is bizarre because this is a little songbird with a very unique display. So if you look at the wingtips there, they're vibrating together and they produce this crazy sound that has nothing to do with their voice. It's all produced by their feather. And I just because it's really interesting, I'll play a recording of it. This is off of Merlin, so very handy. Yeah, so I don't know if you could hear that well, but just this crazy
Really
sound.
good, but that's okay.
Yeah, did you hear it?
I don't
sorry.
believe so, so, but
Okay, well, it's this electric buzz, super loud. And because of that, this is like another dream bird I wanted to photograph. And it took 2 years of being in its habitat to finally get this photo. And so, and then also, oftentimes you want to photograph the rarest species. So this is Dusky star frontlet. They're one of the rarest hummingbird species in the world. It's just seen on 3 or 4 different mountaintops. The population estimated at 250 individuals. So, and then also, I mean, talking about like these striking birds, rare birds, but also your target might be a common bird near and dear to your heart, like the brown pelican. So there's a variety of reasons for selecting your target species, but now we're gonna talk about, looks like a slide isn't loading. Let me remember what was there. Okay, yeah, so the next, I think I know what to say. So one of the slides wasn't showing up. But the next part, after you know what species you want to photograph, once you're focused in on, it could be a set of species too, but in general, for this part, I'm talking about taking a proactive approach to selecting a species, and then how do you find it? So where and when is the target found? So field guides are great resources for just seeing a general distribution, the seasons, and possibly the altitudinal range. And so in this slide that's missing, I had a picture of Merlin, because they have range maps. So it's a very handy way of getting a general idea of the distribution. And then I had a field guide range map. But then those field guides, they're not necessarily going to get you the exact locations. So that's where Ebird is very helpful at getting specific locations and date ranges. So I'm sure a lot of you already know about Ebird, so but I'll still go through it briefly. So if you have a species, you, for example, a gold ring tanager, that's what I'm doing an example for. You go to species maps. Oh no. So anyway, okay, I guess some of them aren't loading, but this basically shows it. So in Ebird, the maps, you can get exact locations. So look at the hotspots where other birders have seen that particular species. So then you can narrow in, press a hotspot. Okay, yeah, here, this is Tataman National Park, Camino Montezuma. This is a great location for the gold ring tanager. And yeah, for whoever was asking about great places to go in Colombia, this is probably my top recommendation. It's actually where I live, Montezuma Rainforest. And this is the gold ring tanager. So you can look at the field guide, can get a general idea, but if you want to really figure out where it is, the exact locations, you'll have to go to Ebird. But then once you get to that location, there's still more work to be done. You're not going to just magically see the bird. In what habitat can the target be found? So this is that location where the gold ring tanager is found. It's an endemic species that is found in just 5 different mountains in the Western Andes. So a very special bird. So this is its habitat, or the hotspot. This is a general region, but you're not going to see it everywhere because birds have a lot of them have very specific habitat requirements, and you're going to need to know how to find them. So that's where literature searches are really helpful. Again, field guides provide a very general description of what you need to know, but it can be helpful to dive deeper into the literature. That's where Birds of the World is very helpful, another resource provided by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It does have a little price to gain access, but there you gain species accounts, very detailed, has all the information, all the habitat requirements, and also a good list of references. But if you don't have access to that, another good option is to go to Google Scholar, search the species, and then you can have these academic articles that will go into a lot of detail about the species ecology and life history, and really a lot. I mean, you can, for certain species, there's just so much information out there, it can be overwhelming, but it can be very helpful for narrowing in and finding your target species. But still, you can't, there's not perfect, because for a species like the golden tanager that is understudied, there really isn't much information at all about them. You're going to need to have local knowledge. And I would like to talk about local knowledge because this is crucial for finding species. And I know I'm talking a lot about Colombia, so in order to relate it to a place like Florida, you can still, I mean, local knowledge is really important. If there's this local patch, this nature reserve, before going, you can look on Ebird, see who is a frequent birder, and then maybe reach out to them. And then you're gonna get so much information about where to find it. So this is the owner of Montezuma Rainforest Lodge, where the home of the golden tanager, and you can see that's the golden tanager on her guiding vest. So when you go to this place and you don't have local knowledge, and you have a field guide that says that there's seen between this elevation and kind of this general habitat, okay, it's dense, humid cloud forest, but that's going to be kind of hard to follow. So local guides can show you exactly where to find the species, what curve, and because they've spent their whole lives there, it's their job, and they know so much about the region and all the bird species. And also, if you're traveling, utilizing local guides is actually really beneficial for conservation, because a lot of the regions in Latin America are conserved because of conservation, because otherwise they would just be cut down. Tourism provides another means of making a living, and that means that places can be conserved, and that is a very crucial thing that we should be focusing on as we're experiencing this huge crisis of biodiversity loss. So utilizing local guides is something very good to do. So scouting is also something that I recommend, because you can get all the information on the web by locals, but until you actually go there yourself, you're really not going to know what to expect. So scouting is also important for, it's not just bird photography, it's for field research. Like this is a picture of me. For 2 summers, I was working in the Colorado high country, studying brown-capped rosy finches. And scouting was such a crucial part of the whole process, because you can look at Ebird, a lot of the high alpine areas, there's not a lot of birders that go up there. And so my objective of this research was going to different parts of the range. The brown-capped rosy finch is almost endemic to Colorado. So a very special bird, only breeds above tree line. So my goal is to target different populations on different mountains mountain ranges, different corners of the state. And so then I had to do a ton of hiking in the high country, trying to find the birds and figuring out where they can actually be found. And so that's what I want to talk about now, developing search images. This is something crucial if you want to become a successful photographer, where you can go out in the field and you just know how to find certain species based off of your habitat and so many cues, really, because it can be also subconsciously. So the brown-capped rosy finch, their preferred habitat, they need to have these big cliffs for nesting, and then these snowfields, which they often feed on. And so after the 2 summers of working with this species, it just got super clear, like how to find them. And it was just second nature, and to where I was actually able to look from satellite imagery and then find locations where they can be found. So this is that same location. So that cliff there, the snowfields, by looking at Google Earth is like, okay, there's definitely rosy finches there. And so at this location, that was my most successful site. I captured, I believe it was 45 individuals, which was unheard of for the species during the summer. So scouting was crucial in the success of that project, and that can be translated to photography as well. Because if you want to go out photographing this special species, the brown-capped rosy finch, you're going to really need to know the bird inside and out. And I also, so this is something that has happened to me quite often, and I'm sure it's happened to you as well. There's a species that has eluded you for so long. It's this species that is, your nemesis. You just, for some reason, you cannot find it, even though you should be seeing it. And finally, you see that species. For me, that was this ochre-breasted tanager, or ochre-breasted antpitta, sorry, which is a pretty elusive species found in the Andes in Colombia. And I was at this location and everybody was like, oh yeah, that's pretty easy to see. Like it's like they're surprised that I had so much trouble seeing it. And finally, I saw it for the first time after probably 2 years at this location. So I see it for the first time. And then after that first time, I was seeing it everywhere. And this has happened so much to me with other species. And it almost feels like trickery. Like, why is it that I don't see the species and then I finally see it and then boom, like all the time? And that has to do with search images, in my opinion. When you see a bird for the first time, your brain starts picking up on all these different cues subconsciously. And so then when you return to the field, all that knowledge that's somewhere up here, it knows how to find the species, and then boom, there's one. And then they just seem like they're everywhere. And so yeah, there's, at this location, the Montezuma rainforest, there's so much habitat, a very vast area. And even though like it's so complex that there's so many micro habitats that this species, according to the field guide, it could be everywhere, but in reality, they're only going to be found in very specific locations. So this ochre-breasted tanager, in the end, I figured out that they prefer between a certain elevation, not ridges, not slopes, not flat places, but these little tiny ravines that I think probably retain a little more moisture. And in those locations, they're actually pretty easy to find. So that can be applied to if you're in the field, if you just kind of tune into that, okay, here's a species, I want to photograph this one. which might take a long time. So let me start paying attention to every little detail about their habitat and also about their behavior, because it's not just like for this species, your brain picks up on this little fleeting glance of motion on the side, and then somehow your brain has the ability to recognize that blur in this corner of the eye, and that just comes with a lot of experience. And yeah, it's something crazy. And so for this species, I was able to get that. Yeah, very happy with that photo. And that's the end of that section. If there's any more questions.
There's a couple that came up here and a couple comments. Let's see, a lot of comments on your photos of your birds. People do like those, and I'll give that feedback to you. You might throw in some of the settings and stuff you use frequently if you think about it as you go along.
Okay.
See, you know, I love the bathing photo. Birds of the World, a comment was, they believe about $40 a yearly, but well worth it if you're looking to gain more knowledge. Also, I use topo maps. I have Android Auto in my car, and I find that looking at the terrain by where I'm at is also very useful. So I'll just throw that out there as another way.
Yeah,
to get knowledge.
I can add down to that because I actually use a topo map. Gaia GPS, it's an application, and it is crucial for my research in Colombia, because then I can look at the terrain and know how to get to these very inaccessible places. So you can look at, okay, this ridge winds up this mountain, and then I can get to this particular elevation where I should be able to find this particular target species. So yeah, it's very important as well. Very useful.
Okay, I think that's all the questions and comments at this point.
Just one comment, Jay. Someone has here, Merlin can also record and help identify bird calls, as well as an app called BirdNet. Have you used that function much, Joel?
I have never used it actually. And yeah, I don't have much to say about that. At the moment, I'm just staying more old school at learning them. But yeah, it's a very, I think, useful tool for birders people getting into birding and learning bird calls. Yes, it can be very powerful. And I would like to see how it works. And I think that it doesn't really work in Latin America yet, because it's more for North America at the moment. Is that correct?
That I don't know, but Susan says she made the other comment. She said the option is new on Merlin. So.
Yeah, I haven't used it, but I'm not sure if it works yet in Latin America. But I've heard it works incredibly well up here in North America. It's crazy advances in technology. It's crazy.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm ready to move on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was part 2, was talking about finding your species, and I could have gone into a lot more detail, but because it's basically, yeah, get out there in the field, do your research, and the results will come. But in this part, I want to talk about once you actually find the species that you're after, what's next? As a bird photographer, you're going to want to get into the best position to photograph it. And that's a whole other set of skills. I think people refer to as fieldcraft. And so, yeah, part 3, approaching your targets. These are the points I'm going to go over. Know your subject and their circle of fear. Gaining trust, caution, the use of playback, which is going to be something, yeah, it's actually pretty interesting. And going undetected, you don't always need to get close. Okay, here we go. So know your subject and their circle of fear. It's crucial to know, once you have your target species, to know that bird inside and out, its behavior and its circle of fear, which means how close can you get to it before it starts getting nervous and flies off. So ant pittas, this is an amazing group of birds found throughout Latin America. In general, they are super shy, super hard to see. They're probably the hardest group of birds to see. And it's like the for birders and bird photographers, it's like the best thing. If you can get a photo of the species, it's amazing. But there's one species that doesn't care about your presence whatsoever. So this is the tawny ant pitta. It's a species that's found above tree line. And so if you know, yeah, like this species, okay, yeah, it's very relaxed. It's super, yeah, pretty much friendly. You can just walk up to it and get the right angle, and yeah. But a lot of species, that is not the case. So approach or wait. So that example, the tawny ant pitta, that's an example where you have no problem getting closer, changing your position. But a lot of species, that just does not work. And I would say a good example are, well, sometimes is shorebirds. So a lot of times if you try and approach your shorebirds, they're going to kind of go off in the opposite direction. They're not too timid, but if you're going, like, if you're taking the approach of approaching them, you're just going to basically be chasing it around in circles. So in that case, it's better to wait. So these are Western sandpipers I photographed in Sonora, Mexico. I think at first I was probably trying to like get closer, and they're just kind of, running along. I would only get photos of them facing the other direction. So then I decided to just lay down on the ground, even though they weren't there, and just be patient. And then sure enough, they came around and they came towards me. And that's because I was just letting them come to me. And that's for a lot of species, that is a very important strategy. But then another example of a species that you can have no problem getting closer to, that's the cinnamon flycatcher here on the right. Another bird found in Colombia in the Andes. It's probably like one of the most friendly birds I've worked with. They have zero fear of humans. So they can get this really intimate shot like I got here. And so that all comes with, because I've been with bird photographers that I've been guiding in Colombia, and the cinnamon flycatcher, for example, they're like, oh, this is like so cool. They're photographing them, and it's like still like really far away, and they're not getting closer because they think that it'll fly away. And then I have to tell them, well, actually this species, you can get closer. And then to their surprise, they got a little closer and it just stayed right there. And across Latin America, and we mix this, I'm going to talk about mixed species flocks, which is a very common thing to encounter in Latin America, where there are multiple species that join together in these big flocks. And actually a lot of the species found in these forest environments in Latin America, they are mixed flock associated. So they're pretty much only found in these groups of birds, multiple species that are all working together. They all have their certain role. There's one that's the leader, one that's keeping a lookout. And so they have all these roles. It's this very complex system. And I found that if you want to photograph these species, you have to keep up with the flock. So that means you're always kind of running along with the flock. And a lot of times the members of these flocks, they don't care. So for this bird, this is a blueback conebill. My strategy was keep up with the mixed flock, because sometimes they move quite fast through their environment. And they don't really care. So if you're kind of a little like, okay, I can't get too close because I'm going to scare them away, you're just not going to get photos because they're going to leave you in the dust. But yeah, in this case, I got this blueback conebill, always moving so quick. So it's really hit or miss though. And so gaining trust, this is a different strategy. Some species, they're just never gonna, depending on how you act around them, they're never going to let you approach them. For example, this is a white-tailed ptarmigan. Yeah, in this section, I'm gonna talk about your energy to stay relaxed, because I believe that birds can sense your tension. And so if you come across a white-tailed ptarmigan and you're all up tense, you're like all in a rush, like, okay, I got to get a photo as quick as possible. In my experience, this species will never, it'll just be problematic. They're going to be going away. They're going to not cooperate. And I've had experience with that firsthand with clients of mine, where they're all up tense. They're trying to photograph as quick as possible, and it's just game over. They're not gonna let you, they're not gonna cooperate. But when you come across a species, if you take some deep breaths, relax, and actually just take it slow, you can sit down. These species, they're found above tree line and in the West. So this is in Colorado. Almost act like a grazing mammal, like an elk. Like you're don't really care about the bird or this individual. You're just there, a natural part of the, like, no, don't pose a threat to the species. And then magically they will accept your presence and you'll have just the most magical experience with them. It was this summer, I went up to the tundra. I found a mother and his chick, so that's the mother and the chick. And when I first approached them, they're very alert. They're looking around, a little nervous. And so then I just, okay, take it slow. I sat down and then watching the posture, wait until they relax, and then automatically I'm just accepted into their lives. So then you can spend the whole morning just enjoying the beauty of these species and literally be a couple of feet away from them. You can be sitting and they'll just approach you. They'll basically walk inches from your foot. And so, yeah, that is something that works on certain species. Just focus on your, just being relaxed. And another example, I was birding with somebody in Colombia, a bird photographer, and he told me, I can just never get a photo of the golden-fronted redstart. That's what this species is here. He said they're just always fly away. They're so shy. And then in my experience, they're actually one of the most common or easy species to photograph. They're so friendly. This one was hopping along the road only a few feet from where I was standing. And sure enough, when I was birding with this guy, we came across a species and he's like super intense, all trying to get a photo as quick as possible, and just flew off. And so for me, I think that has to do with the bird sensing your energy. And quickly, another example, this is a few years ago. Well, actually, this was actually a long time ago. I was 18. So this is my first time outside the country. I was in Belize. This is Crooked Tree Sanctuary. And this is an amazing place to see jabiroos. And I rented a canoe so I could go out into the lagoon and it was just this amazing experience. I was watching these jabiroos all around me, feeding. This one stabbed this fish, and this amazing experience. And then there was another bird photographer from the shore. He was looking out at me like, oh man, that would be a dream. So lucky. So then he asked me, oh, tomorrow, can I join you on the canoe to get photos of jabiru? Because I see that you can get really close to them and like really easy. And so the next day we went out, and he was again another person with a very intense presence, and we had no success. The contrast from the previous day was so extreme that it was like, yeah, I think that there is something to this. The birds can really sense the energy that you emit. And when you get a bird to accept your presence, it is just the most special thing. This is a Plushcap that I photographed in Montezuma rainforest, this place in Colombia. And this is a very elusive species. They're super difficult to photograph. I mean, they're just these little birds that bounce around all over. And so I came across this one bird, and I followed it around a little bit, and it decided to perch a couple feet from me, start bathing in the sun, preening its feathers, and yawning. This is, it's actually yawning here. And that just is so special to have a bird that you're photographing and just see it there completely relaxed, totally accepting your presence, and knowing that you're not disturbing that particular bird. It's a really amazing experience. And going off of like the not disturbing the birds, caution the use of playback. And a lot of times birders and bird photographers think that playback is the only way of photographing some of these elusive species. And this is especially true in the tropics, because there are so many species, they're very elusive, and like, yeah, you need playback. There's no other way. But in my experience, playback actually does more harm than good, not just for disturbing the species, but for getting a photograph. So playback is definitely an ethical concern, that you're basically triggering a reaction out of the bird to defend its territory. Like this is a tawny crested tanager. The first time I went down to Colombia, I was fishing to see what birds would pop up. And this bird got so agitated. And I learned later that this species in general, they're super sensitive to playback or any sort of pitching. So not only are you disturbing the bird, but sometimes you get a very unnatural photo of like, who wants to see a bird, like an image of a bird that's upset. So a lot of times, if you don't use playback, you're gonna get a lot more pleasing images where they're relaxed. And again, playback can also, sometimes it brings the birds out, but it also scares them away. For an example, I have so many experiences where I've been with somebody, a bird photographer or bird guide, and you have a bird that either they use playback and it never shows, it's just, it doesn't work, or the bird is visible and they use playback and then it flies away. So a lot of times playback is just not necessarily your friend. I've had so many experiences where I've had like, okay, this is perfect. You have this bird perched right in the open, and then somebody puts on playback and then it flies off, lost, no more chance of photographing that bird. So definitely caution the use of playback. And personally, all these photos that I've shared were not, no use of playback there. So I have started to be very vigilant and not using that method of drawing birds out.
Joel,
Yeah,
It was raised up about playback, and playback to me is using bird recordings to attract the birds.
yes.
Is that, what you're referring to?
Yeah, and sorry for not clarifying that. So playback is using the song. So I was showing you Merlin, that app that you can have access to all the bird songs, and XenoKanto, which is the website with all the bird songs. That is, so if you play back, that's what it's playback. You play the song. That is a strategy for attracting the bird. But oftentimes that is a territorial reaction, which is not very ethical, especially for breeding birds that they're focusing all their energy into providing for their young. So anything you do that really disrupts the natural flow of the environment you're photographing in, you should reconsider your methods. So that's what I mean by playback and why I caution the use of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And going undetected. So this is another strategy of getting within range of birds so you can photograph them, get those really intimate photos. And to also, because there's a lot of species that they're super sensitive to the presence, our presence, and it's going to be nearly impossible to photograph them. So a lot of people use blinds, and a lot of times in the field, you don't necessarily need a blind. You can kind of look, okay, I can kind of stand by this tree, which will kind of eliminate your overwhelming presence. So kind of be a little more discreet, or get down low, hide behind some bushes. That works, but oftentimes people like to use blinds where you actually, well, ideally are invisible to the birds or wildlife that you are photographing. And I don't own any blinds, so I have to get creative. So these are some examples. You don't necessarily need to buy one because they can be quite expensive, actually. And this is an example of a plastic bookshelf with an army poncho. And so like where you put your head through, that's where the lens sticks through, and it worked quite well. Oh, even also a bag of rice for stability. So the results, these are the results. This is grayish piculet. It's an endemic species to Colombia. I noticed that there was a nest in this cavity in this tree, just a couple feet off the ground. And it was this perfect opportunity to finally photograph the species. I never had success before, but I saw that they were very sensitive to my presence. They would not come to the nest if I was anywhere nearby. So obviously I didn't want to disturb the birds, and also I wanted to photograph them. So I got creative. I put together that blind, and automatically I blended into the environment. They'd come and go, no problem. And I was able to experience some pretty amazing behavior as well with this. On the left is a female. It has ant larvae that it brought to the nest. And then that's a male on the right with the yellow feathers on the crown. So this is actually a woodpecker species. It's about the size of a pygmy nuthatch, but they're relatives of the woodpecker. Very interesting group of birds. And this is just recently another creative blind I put together. I wanted to photograph ducks. Down in Colombia, there aren't many ducks. So since I've been back here in Colorado, I want to start photographing them. And a lot of the times ducks are super skittish. They're really flighty. Oftentimes will just fly away if you try and get anywhere within photography range. And so this is just a piece of cardboard and a string that help with stability. That's the Peak Design travel tripod that I use. So you can get down to a pretty eye level view. And the results, this was, I think 3 days ago, was, oh yeah, and then I put an old bed sheet over the top to further conceal my presence. And this is the result. So you can kind of get creative and to blend into the environment, or you could go the more easy route of buying a blind. They can be very helpful for certain species that are very, very sensitive. So that's actually American coot. And you don't always need to get close. There's this, I think, emerging, it's getting, I think, a little more popular as of late, is small in-frame photos, where it's basically a landscape photo with a bird in there. And they can be very small. So this is probably, these are 2 bald eagles in the dead tree, a red-tailed hawk, and then a red-winged blackbird to the right. So there's a few species, but basically a lot of species, they're not gonna let you get very close. Sometimes you just have to accept that, get creative, and go for different sort of shots like small in frame. So here are a couple examples just showing you that you don't have to get close. This is a white-chinned spinetail, I think that's what it's called. And this is also a very effective way of telling more of a story about the species. So you can see the habitat, put it in the bigger picture. So this is a species in a very unique habitat called Paramo, which is above tree line in South America. Yeah, you can get very artsy. So these are the photos that actually possibly have more potential of selling. And yeah, so this is a northern screamer and a wood stork on top, and then a tropical kingbird there flying in on the right, lower right. This is a white-capped dipper, which is normally very difficult to approach in certain locations. So sometimes you just have to step back and work with the bigger picture. So yeah, here's a few more examples of showing their habitat. They can be quite pleasing. Oh, that's not, okay. And that actually, oh man, I think I lost my last slide, but that is okay. Because I think, are we good on time?
Yeah, we're winding down here at this point.
Okay, so yeah, that actually, I just had one slide that somehow got left out. I'm not sure how that happened, but as a conclusion, in this presentation, I mean, a lot of presentations, they focus on the technical aspect of photography, its settings, it's the equipment, it's lighting, composition. They're all so important. But a big part of bird photography is the field skills. It's how do you actually find them? How do you approach them? How do you get into position? And it involves so much research and really understanding the ecology, the life history, and yeah, the life of the species that we all love to photograph. And I think that covers it. So thank you for participating, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Joel, you had one comment. Person really was intrigued by your blind skills, building them. So you got kudos for that.
Yeah. Well,
how do you get to the Montezuma Lodge was a recent question.
how do you get to it?
Yeah, or if you can send me the information,
Okay.
I will forward it back out.
Yeah, and here is some of my information. So anybody that has questions about Colombia, even Costa Rica, I have some experience in Costa Rica, but more so in Colombia, you can write me at my email. I'm more than happy to help. Montezuma Rainforest, that's a location that I have been living at. It is considered to be one of the best locations in Colombia, most diverse, and a lot of endemic species. I continue to, it never ceases to amaze me, the location, the diversity. It's not just birds, it's insects, orchids, all the plant life. And really, there's so much to discover from the perspective of a biologist. So many species waiting to be discovered, and also to understand how the bigger picture, how the ecosystem works and functions. And yeah, also the importance of conserving these treasures, biodiversity hotspots. And there are a lot of threats down there, deforestation, hunting. And so, yeah, it is my mission to use my photography to combine it with conservation efforts to make a difference. And that, in 2022, I will be doing a presentation about that, conservation photography. So I'll probably see a lot of you there.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. You've got a lot of people said excellent presentation. Thank you, good presentation. Like your photos. I'm sure you're gonna get some people contacting you about Montezuma and some of your other experience. So I know we appreciate the fact that you put that up and are open for conversation.
Yeah, and I'm looking through them. Do we have time? I can answer a few more if somebody.
I think you've answered most of them.
Okay, well, somebody said, is it safe, I think, in Colombia?
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, is it safe to go to Colombia? So I think that Colombia is a very good option if you want to travel, get to an extremely biodiverse region. Colombia is exploding in tourism right now. Was kind of off the radar before due to a lot of factors, but it's gotten safer in recent years. So I think it's very safe to travel there, but only if you are careful. It's really the same any location in the world. You have to know the no-go zones, and go with listen to the locals, because the locals will know what regions are safe and what regions aren't. Because Colombia is still very unstable politically. There's a lot of civil unrest that isn't, but I think that there is a way of going there and being very safe. If you're smart, because if you go blindly and aren't really paying attention to what's going on and where you're going, then you could potentially get into some situations. But overall, it's an amazing country. The people are super nice. It also depends on the region. Montezuma Rainforest is located in the coffee region, which includes the Western Andes, a little piece of the Western Andes, the Cauca Valley, and then the Eastern Andes. So it's just so much to do. Yeah.
Well,
So
Joel, thank you. I think your advice, though, to sum it up, is if you're going to a foreign country, talk to people, get local guides, and get local information as to where and when to visit certain areas and what areas not to visit. I know that's been my experience. Any other questions or comments from people other than what we've seen on the chat?
The one comment I'll make is thank you very much, Joel. Great presentation, great photos. Using a 100 to 400 millimeter Canon lens myself, I will say you do a very good job of capturing these small birds. In my experience with a crop size sensor, your camera, I believe, is a full size sensor. I typically, with the 1.4 approximate magnification for birds of the smaller size that you photographed, I typically need to get within 15 to 20 feet. So clearly your blinds are very, very effective, or your calm demeanor to get them to approach you is
Yeah.
working very well. I myself have noticed, when I'm in an outdoor area, if I'm already in place or if I'm really just relaxed and not overly frantic, the birds do tend to stay around a little longer. So I will agree with that observation. I've noticed it firsthand myself.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of times I don't even use a blind. I just rely on the waiting for birds to accept my presence, because blinds can be kind of cumbersome to carry around. A lot of locations, you have to really get to remote locations.
And from looking at your photographs, it looks like you tend to stay on the larger aperture side, 4.5 to 5.6 perhaps.
Yeah.
Based on the depth of field that I was seeing, not just in the background, but around the subject. So needless to say, I'm getting slightly technical for those here on the Zoom meeting that may be curious about the type of settings you're using. A lot of the times when I saw your photographs, it seemed to be, when I say indirect lighting, either it was cloudy, so you did not have harsh lighting. So in general, a lot of your situations seem to be, I'll use the word diffused lighting. So I'm guessing you're using higher ISOs, perhaps ISO 800 or above. What types of shutter speeds are you using just on average?
Yeah, well, it is a very, down there in Colombia, it's a very dark environment, a lot of clouds and a lot of time like in the forest. Yeah, it does require high ISOs. And really, I don't know if I can really say like a range. But
yeah, it really varies as to whether it's on a tripod or, if it's handheld, if the subject's moving or still.
And it's, yeah, actually pretty much, I would say possibly 100% of those photos were taken handheld, because I only recently got a tripod. And yeah, I mean, really just test the limits of the ISO. And I also, I think I'm pretty good at handheld holding. So trying to be very steady. And yeah, I do get some blurry photos and I do get some very grainy photos, but in general, the Canon 70 Mark II does pretty well. So I've used that setup for basically my whole photography career, and it does the job.
But great photos overall. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll talk some more, if nothing else, through hunts. And again, I encourage people, if you have questions, you see Joel's information, or you can contact me and I'll forward that information on to you. Have a great evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening.